Welcome back. The House Select Committee on China Chairman John Moolenaar sent subpoenas to JPMorgan CEO Jamie Dimon and Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan over their roles in underwriting the IPO of Chinese battery manufacturer CATL. The company is a key player in China's military-civil fusion strategy. It is part of the Chinese military. They've developed dual-use technology with both commercial and military applications. Bank of America told Fox Business, quote, "We've had constructive engagement with the committee and will continue to engage." JPMorgan declining to comment. Joining me now is the man himself who sent the letters and the subpoenas. Michigan Congressman John Moolenaar is the chairman of the House Select Committee on China. He issued those subpoenas. Mr. Chairman, thanks so much for being with us. Tell us why you issued those subpoenas, sir.
Well, this goes back to the springtime when we started first working with the two banks to understand their leadership role in this IPO out of Hong Kong. And we asked very significant questions in a very polite way for information, because this is kind of the tip of the iceberg of companies receiving American investor dollars through Hong Kong. And we wanted to know why they were bankrolling a company that is on the Chinese military list. The Pentagon describes them as a Chinese military company. Also, Commerce says they're controlled by the Chinese government. We wanted to understand this better. So the subpoenas are a result of the fact that they've really stonewalled the information. They said they did due diligence, but we simply want to know how they came to those conclusions and to assure that investors are not investing in a Chinese military buildup.
But, I mean, they blew you off, right? I mean, they went and they took the company public.
They did, and they also, when we requested information, they basically sent us press clippings. So it's not that they have been working with us constructively. They've been stonewalling, and this was the way to get information from them that is vital, because ultimately I don't believe, and I don't think the American people want to fund the Chinese military buildup.
Yeah, I mean, so what are you going to do about it? I mean, how far are you going to go over this? Because, we have talked so much about this issue with all of these Chinese companies traded on U.S. exchanges. I asked Paul Atkins about it, the Securities and Exchange Commission chairman, and there are companies right now that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ that are, in fact, they've been sanctioned. You sent a letter urging the Securities and Exchange Commission to delist CCP-linked companies from U.S. exchanges. Have you received an update from that?
We've received communications, but again, this is an area where I believe public policy needs to catch up. And I believe Congress needs to pass legislation on outbound investments and sets guardrails, both in the area of sectors as well as companies that are being sanctioned as part of the Chinese military. There's no way either taxpayer dollars or American investor dollars should be going into those entities. And I think that if ultimately we're going to have to do legislation on this, have the president's support for that.
So, I mean, Congress is right now investigating JPMorgan and Bank of America over their role in these IPOs. It includes that subpoena, and you've got two congressional leaders demanding that the SEC explain how U.S. investors are being adequately protected against, investing in these companies. How are investors being protected from your standpoint? If I'm an ordinary investor and I see Chinese stocks traded on U.S. exchanges and I say, oh, well, maybe there's a growth story there, and I invest in those companies, how am I protected?
Well, to your point, you are not protected. And that's the problem here. The Chinese national security laws prevent these companies from communicating information that would enable us to understand the ties to the Chinese military or the Chinese Communist Party. Often these are shell companies located in other parts of the world. And so you aren't really getting the same kind of confidence that you would. And so I think investors need to be wary, and I think these leaders need to be held accountable for this.
I mean, how much is this going to affect, do you think, a trade deal? Because you know that if the U.S. pulls this lever and pulls these stocks off of U.S. exchanges, I mean, the capital markets in America are the deepest capital markets in the world, the safest in the world. If, in fact, this pressure, goes higher and in fact you see a move to pull these stocks off of U.S. exchanges, is that going to affect the president's ability to do a trade deal with China? Or maybe China doesn't make any concessions and then the president is forced to fight back?
I think China will leverage every advantage they have in these trade negotiations, critical minerals, technologies, and this will be one of the areas that they will try and leverage in the negotiation. I have confidence our president's an excellent negotiator, but we have to recognize China's under Xi Jinping's leadership. They're threatening a takeover of Taiwan. They're aggressively intimidating neighbors in the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. They're, the way they're communicating right now, they are on a wartime footing with their military-industrial buildup. So I think we have to recognize that we wouldn't have done business with the Soviet Union. You look at who the partners, the life partners of China. It's Russia, North Korea, Iran. And so why are we helping them build their military-industrial complex?
That's a great point, Congressman. Really important point. I want to get to the Panama Canal in that vein as well. But let me ask you this before I get there. Would you like to see the president do an executive order that could force U.S. exchanges to delist Chinese companies? Because he could do that by adding those companies to the 1260H list of companies with ties to China's military. Through executive order, the president can do this.
I believe he should, and he should bring that up in his meetings with Xi Jinping. I think, when it comes to the Chinese military, we have to recognize they are directed by the Chinese Communist Party. And there is no private sector between, the civil military fusion. They do not have the autonomy that we do here in the United States, where the government's job is to secure the right people. And so I think that kind of action would be helpful and at least bring that to the table as part of a negotiation.
Yeah, by the way, he could also do an executive order to bar U.S. citizens from investing in those companies if they're on any list. Because, look, there are new concerns this morning over Beijing's trade controls, including a potential expansion of power in the Panama Canal if the BlackRock CK Hutchison deal doesn't go through. The deadline for the Chinese company CK Hutchison to sell the ports has passed. That deadline was July 27th, Mr. Chairman. Your reaction on the potential for China to expand dominance of the Panama Canal?
Well, it's a huge concern, and we can see that the Chinese government is actually prohibiting what would be normal private sector activities. They're doing that with TikTok. At the same time, they say that they comply with local laws, jurisdictions. The Chinese government steps in and sets the terms.
Yeah.
So I have to recognize we are dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, not some private entity.
All of this after we learn of this shocking discovery inside the FBI. Sources told Fox News Digital that Director Kash Patel found a tranche of documents related to the Trump-Russia probe inside of multiple burn bags. These burn bags are used to destroy highly classified information, Mr. Chairman. I spoke with John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, on Sunday, and I mentioned this, in fact, during this whole Russia probe, which, of course, the CIA and the FBI were trying to stop President Trump. I raised another issue, and that is the dereliction of duty from your colleagues on the left who were trying to take down their political enemy and ignoring what China was doing to America. That's why we are where we are right now, with the reliance on the Chinese supply chains. Watch this. Collusion, lie, destroy people's lives, rip the country apart, but it also diverted energy and resources away from the real threats. So you have people like Adam Schiff, who is now a senator, completely ignoring the fact that Americans were relying on China for their critical elements that we need. For example, today, we rely on 90% of our prescription drugs for China. They're made in China. And so all of this was 100%. Going on, and they were yelling, Russia, 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 and in fact, not even focusing on the actual threats. That, in my view, is a dereliction of duty.
Complete 100%, Maria. Completely agree. And don't limit it to China. So the mess that we just cleaned up, the Trump administration cleaned up with regard to Iran and its pursuit of a nuclear weapon, what's happening in Ukraine with Russia that we've inherited, and of course, our greatest geopolitical threat, China. All of these people helped build China. They helped create the threat that China is, that Russia is, that Iran is, because they put politics in front of national security. All of these people are responsible for the threats that we're facing as a country right now.
Congressman, I think this is really important. We always talk about what they did to Trump to try to take him down, but look at all of the things they ignored.
Well, you're right, and I think his statement there, putting politics over national security, and I would even add over national interest, is the problem here. You know, some short-term political victory for a party is not worth giving up our autonomy as a nation and the freedoms that we enjoy. And that's one of the things we work very hard at on our select committee, is try and work as much as we can in a bipartisan way that looks at the America's national interest.
Yep.
And that's the key for the future.
Well, thanks for your work, Congressman. We appreciate it, and we're going to be watching what you're doing next in terms of those Chinese companies. Thank you, sir. Congressman John Moolenaar, chairman of China Select. We'll be right back.